Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight for this conversation with Renee and I. This is the first of a series of things that I hope we do relatively regularly that are sort of fireside chats, where we have a good conversation, and we just talk about the campaign, talk about a specific issue, and dive kind of deep into it, and then open up the conversation to audience, open up the conversation to Q&A, and just go through and have a good conversation. So, like I said, this is the first one of these that we're doing, so your feedback will be much appreciated on all aspects of it, on the aspects of getting logged in, on the aspects of how it's all going to work, but also on the aspects of the content and things like that. So, with that, let me do a couple of housekeeping things before we get started here. Brian it will be in the chat, and he and Renee will be looking for questions that are occurring in there that we can surface for the Q&A. Brian will also be there to help with any technical problems that you're having. So if you need anything or something's not working for you, just ping Brian and he'll be able to help you with that. Then we are going to also we will have a couple of places for Q&A throughout it, and I can let Renee talk a little bit more about the agenda that we have and the plan we have for tonight. And then, of course, there is a recording right now, so everybody will get sent the recording, and we'll have it on our website as well. And we're going to go till about 8:30 Eastern time, so about an hour and a half. And there will be opportunity if we get past 8:30 to have future conversations and things like that about these topics. So with that, let me turn it over to Renee, and she can introduce a little bit of the flow of what we're going to go through tonight, and then we can get into the conversation.
Thank you. First, thanks, Andy, for asking me to be involved. It's always fun for me to be able to chat with you and to get people as excited as I am for, what you're about to embark upon. I think it's honestly, like, I don't know if I tell you enough how much I like admire that you decided that you're going to be the person to step up and do this. I've been asked a couple of times to run for things, and I'm always like, no, no, thanks. So I really, hats off in every way possible that you decided to go this route, and I think it's awesome. So just a couple of housekeeping things. I have some questions already kind of pre-situated for Andy. We'll talk through a few questions. And then we'll turn and make sure that the audience doesn't have any questions. And then if we don't get too sidetracked because the audience has a whole list of great questions, then I have a few more that I'm going to keep in the till until the second half. And then we'll go back. For those of you who are watching, if you have a question, if you could just drop it in the chat or a comment even that you just want to share as we're talking, that would be appreciated. And we just, we really want this to be like a fireside chat, an opportunity for not just me to ask the questions that I think are relevant for people watching, but also for you all to have an opportunity to ask Andy questions as well. That's going to be important. So thank you everyone for joining this very, very quickly. My name is Renee Johnston. I am a co-host on a weekly show on Black Liberation Media. I'm also a Green Party member and committee chair for the Green Party in New Jersey. And Andy and I have now been in communication for a little over 2 years. And so again, I'm really excited to be able to be here with Andy and with you all. So unless I missed anything, Andy, and you can let me know, give a thumbs up if I missed anything.
No, I think we're good to go.
Cool. So let's just get into it. So first things first, let's talk about you, why you're running. I think it's important that the folks in Maryland and even people who may be joining from other places understand why you are a good consideration for the governor's seat. And I think for me, the person that you are, as I just said, a little while ago, is really like it's important for people to understand why you chose to take the task on and to just know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, great. So, am I moving into the right part of the screen, or is it still just Renee? That's all I see is Renee on my screen.
I see both of us. So
Okay,
I think it's probably your view is
excellent.
speaker only. So I think you're good to go.
Okay, great. So yeah, so who am I? So I went to high school in Frederick, Maryland. I went to college in Towson and in St. Mary's. I currently live in Baltimore with my wife, my 4 cats, and our 6 chickens. I grew up here, and I grew up here, and my family mostly lives in Maryland. My mom was a federal employee for a long time. Both of my brothers have been federal employees. Much of my family still lives here in Maryland. So, Maryland is my home. Even though I've traveled a lot, it is the place that I come back to, and it matters a lot to me. So a couple of things in my life that have helped influence my sort of desire to get involved in this way. One was high school and college debate. I was on the high school debate team at Governor Thomas Johnson in Frederick. I debated in college at Towson, and I went around the country for a while coaching college, high school, and middle school debate at colleges in different places. Part of that effort involves setting up urban debate league programs and helping get kids in Long Beach and Baltimore City engaged in the activity of debate. In 2008, I returned to Towson University, where I had been a student, and I was a coach of the first team of 2 African American students to win a national debate championship. And they did so by calling out the problems, the white supremacy of the debate institution, and offering a transformative vision forward. That really helped to shape my politics and my understanding of how to use persuasion and argument in order to get things done, and helped me to understand that things that we think might not always be possible actually are possible if you have a vision for them, do the hard work in order to get them done, and are rooted in justice. The third thing I would say here is that I've been involved in the Green Party for about the last almost 10 years at this point. I had voted Green before, I had supported Greens before, but I wasn't actively involved in Green organizing. And in 2015, after the Baltimore uprising, I looked around and realized that the solutions to the problems that were endemic in Baltimore and across the state and across the nation weren't getting fixed by either of the 2 parties. So I looked and I found the Baltimore Green Party, and I joined up. So that's a little bit of who I am, and we can get more into some of those things later. But I think that why I decided to run is I've always believed in grassroots democracy. I've always believed in a multi-party system, and I think the Green Party should be one of those parties. And I looked at we've been paying attention to this governor's race for a long time. My friend and mentor, Kevin Zeese, was considering running for it in 2018. He didn't actually end up running for it. And then he passed away in 2020. And I wish he was here today to see this campaign, because I think he'd be really excited about it. But we've been watching this race for a long time. We understand in the Green Party that the governor's race is the race that defines how the party is seen by the people of the state. Whether we like it or not, most people look at candidates as a way of understanding parties, and most people look at campaigns as a way of understanding the values of a party. So we think it's important to run a candidate that has a green vision of what happens in Maryland. And I looked after 2022, when our candidate, who had like a 3-month campaign, almost had one of our best performances ever. I realized that if we had a long campaign and we really put the time into building the movement and the ground game and the capacity to organize, we could actually really move the party forward in the state of Maryland at a time when people really need it. So when, and Renee, as you know, I've thought about it a lot. I've gone back and forth on whether I'm going to do it a lot, but I ultimately decided I'm going to do it. Right now is a good time, and it's very important that we have a different party offering different perspectives rooted in peace, justice, democracy, and ecology.
Just just the answer they needed, Andy. I mean, and and you all, just to make it clear, when he says he went back and forth, this was like a 2-year decision-making process for Andy. When we met, you were 2 years out from the announcement, and you had just started to even consider whether or not it was going to be something you did. So just know that, Andy did not go into this process lightly. He did not, it wasn't a whim. It was a really intense, in-depth communication about, both with himself and I think with the people who were going to support you, about how what the path forward was going to be. So you brought up your work with the debate teams. You brought up a little bit about the organizing, but I'd like you to talk about that a little bit more because you've been on the ground, with multiple organizations around the area in Baltimore and in Maryland doing policy work. I know you all had that major win with Question H, which was a massive win, being that you got the city of Baltimore to do something it had never done in previous elections. So can you talk a little bit about how your organizing work is going to impact not only how you run this campaign, but also how you work as a political leader in the state of Maryland?
Yeah, sure. And so let me give a little bit of context on question H before I get into the second part of that question. So question H was a charter amendment that was on the ballot in Baltimore in 2024. It was funded entirely by David Smith, who is a conservative media mogul who runs Sinclair Media and is the owner of the Baltimore Sun. What he realized was that he could spend unlimited amounts of money getting a charter amendment on the ballot here in Maryland, and that he could shape government that way, because one of the truths of Baltimore politics is that we never reject a charter amendment here in Baltimore. So 50 charter amendments, which are things that basically change the constitution of the city, have passed since 2004 without any of them failing. So David Smith, who tried his hand at funding candidates in the 2024 primary election and in previous elections, had not been very successful with that. But he thought that using this charter amendment process would allow him to sort of sneak one by, and for relatively low amount of personal expenditures out of his massive amounts of wealth, he would have been able to shape government in his interest. So what he did was he proposed something that would have slashed the Baltimore City government in half, the Baltimore City Council almost in half. It would have gone from 14 district seats to 8 district seats. And that would have vastly decreased the amount of representation every single person in Baltimore had. And it would have made it more likely that wealthy business folks like Smith and those who support him would have had more influence over candidates. So I was on the Charter Commission, which is a thing that meets once a decade and gives advice to the city government about what the city charter, basically our constitution, should say. And we saw this coming. We saw this move of David Smith to cut the charter or the council in half coming. He got it there by a petition. And we also knew that these things never failed. So Davon Love, who was one of the debaters that I mentioned when I worked at Towson, and Josh Harris, who was a candidate, who was a Green Party candidate when I first started in 2016, we were all on the Charter Commission, and we realized that we needed to start organizing in order to defeat this thing. And when we started that, nobody believed that we could defeat them because it was a Baltimore political tradition that these things never failed. But we understood that we had to defeat it, right? We couldn't accept that framing of conventional wisdom that said it's impossible to defeat one of these things. So we all went about a strategy that realized that we needed to get electeds, organized labor, civic and advocacy organizations, faith organizations, progressives, radicals, the media, all aligned behind the idea that we could beat it. So that happened, and a bunch of different movements got involved in the process. And at the end of the day, we won. We beat it on a night, on election night, on a night when most of the people who supported Donald Trump were celebrating a big win. David Smith, who was a big supporter of Donald Trump, was celebrating a big loss. And Baltimore finally understood that if we come together and organize, we can do the things that we've been told that we can never do before, and we can win. So that's the sort of short version of it. It's not a short story, so it's not a terribly short version, but it's the quickest I can do at this point. What I think that means is that we have to do a couple of things when we're looking at trying to transform Maryland into a different place than it is. The first is we have to believe that we can do it. We have to believe that no matter what people tell us about what is possible or impossible, the people can organize and defeat the oligarchs. We just have to understand that that's possible, and that, it has possibilities and it has limits, but we have to understand that it's possible. The second thing is we have to have a vision and a strategy for what it would take in order to make the thing happen. So when we started this, we realized that we needed to get the politicians on board, we needed to get organized labor on board, we needed to get the media reporting about it. And we've set about on a strategy to make that happen. And because of that, we were able to succeed with it. And the third thing is we have to be able to make coalitions that make sense outside of the old electoral boundaries that define us. So we have to be able to organize around issues, but we also have to be able to organize around electoral things with new kinds of coalitions that are either there for a moment in order to, struggle against a certain thing, or have long-term possibility of making change beyond any one election.
That's awesome. I always love hearing you talk about the question H, just because whenever whenever you win something that you're absolutely not supposed to win, it's I just feel like it's such a boon. Um, but this is good because it kind of segues us into this conversation about electoral politics, kind of as a general thing, right? And people really struggle with electoral politics in general. And I think a big reason why they struggle is because of this situation in which we live, this duopoly, where you feel like you have to pick between two parties. And if you really look at it and you realize, well, I don't want either one of them, at times you just stay out of it, right? Because you feel like you don't have any good option. And so I'm sure that there'll be people who will say, like, well, if you were really serious, you would just pick one of these parties, right? You just run into the duopoly and pick one versus trying to fight from outside of it. So and especially with you being a Green Party member for so long, I'd like you to talk a little bit about why, a little bit more about why you chose to go with the Green Party. And also just that general idea of the necessity of of a party that's running outside of that duopoly, and how that role of an outside party, like what role they can play in changing like the general political landscape in Maryland. Because I think what people also may not understand is that Maryland is a deep blue state, right? It's run by Democrats. They've got full control over everything. So when things go wrong in Maryland, it's because of Democrats, right? And so I think that plays a major role in like how this conversation has to go when people are talking about, well, why don't you just run within the parties that exist? So if you could talk a little more about that, it'd be great.
Yeah, so if let me start by saying this. If I thought that I could run within the two-party system and get the outcomes that are necessary to change the material conditions for most of the people in the state who most need it, I would consider doing that. But I don't think it's possible. I don't think that justice is possible in a two-party system without outside challengers, because I think that as long as there are only two parties and both parties believe that the other party being in control means like the end of democracy and the end of the world. And I think they do. I think that is the primary thing that motivates the two corporate parties, is making sure that the other one never has any power. And so as long as that is what they believe and how they motivate their campaigns, they're never going to do the kind of transformative things that we need to do to adapt to 21st century life and challenges. They're going to continue fighting against each other, and they're going to continue doing everything they can to deny that the other party ever has power. And they're not going to do everything they can to make sure that the people have power and that the people have the resources to make the change. So for me, I think that this last election is a pretty good example of the limits of the two-party system. It can't stop fascism and it can't stop genocide. And if it can't stop those two things when they're clearly presented to it, then it's not going to be able to address the climate crisis, it's not going to be able to address the inequality crisis, and it's not going to be able to address any of the other things that are coming our way. In Maryland, that means that it won't be able to stop mass incarceration, mass deportation, or mass eviction. So we need somebody from the outside pushing and making a different strategy. And I think at the state government level, this is particularly important. A lot of our focus is on the federal government when we talk about Green parties, because presidential elections and congressional elections take up a lot of attention. But state government is particularly important because it is the level of government that is least responsive to the people and most responsive to the donors, to the party bosses, and to the corporations. And yet, it vastly affects the things that shape our lives. It affects our housing, it affects our healthcare, it affects our education, and it affects the general well-being of most folks. So I think we can look at some historical examples of places where outside forces have really helped to contribute to getting the parties to change. And I would say out isolate like three instances. One is, I think, pretty well known to a lot of people. Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964 used the threat of being inside or outside of the Democratic Party in order to transform the Democratic Party. So we know that Fannie Lou and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party contention went to the convention and they protested their lack of inclusion, and there were a whole bunch of deals to try to get them to come to the table, and ultimately they were not sort of included in the way that they wanted to be included. What I think a lot of people don't know is that they left that convention upset at the Democratic Party and tried to run as independents in the 1964 general election because they understood that their power over the Democratic Party was not to pledge allegiance to it, but to threaten to leave if it wasn't going to give them what they needed. I think that that move ultimately helped to shift the direction of the Democratic Party, helped to shift the direction of the Democratic Party in Mississippi toward one that was better, at least, at caring about poverty reduction and voting rights and education, which were the key points of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party's orientation. I think a second really good example is the United Citizens Party in South Carolina. So in 1969, James Clyburn, yes, that James Clyburn, who is now a prominent Democratic politician, realized that the Democratic Party in South Carolina in 1969 was not moving fast enough to allow Black voters to win nominations, to serve in the General Assembly, or to address the poverty or the policy concerns, which focused on poverty alleviation, civil rights, and education of Black voters in South Carolina. So James Clyburn and a bunch of HBCU students and labor organizers got the United Citizen Party on the ballot in South Carolina in 1970. And they elected 3 independent state delegates, and those were the first state delegates that have been elected in South Carolina, first Black independent delegates that have been elected in South Carolina since Reconstruction. So the South Carolina Democratic Party had to move in a direction that was different because of the pressure of folks being willing to work on the outside of it. And the third example that I like to offer here is the Richmond Progressive Alliance in Richmond, California. So the Richmond Progressive Alliance in the early 2000s was fighting against, the city of Richmond, California was fighting against Chevron, who had a big plant there and dominated city politics, and they ran the sort of Democrats and Republicans who were in town. The Richmond Progressive Alliance understood that that wasn't good, and that situation didn't work. So they ran their own slate of candidates. Many were Green, some were Peace and Freedom Party candidates, and some were independents. And they were able to get elected, hold office, hold Chevron responsible, institute new housing programs, and institute new worker protections that vastly increased the quality of life in people in Richmond, California. So I think that what is valuable about these examples is they show that there is a history of third parties intervening at times when it was really necessary and using that power to force the other parties to actually do something that they had no intention of doing. And that's one of the ways that we effectively use power right now and can effectively do that in Maryland as we look at, the challenges that we face here.
I actually didn't know that about Richmond. I'm gonna have to look into that a little more. That's an interesting story. You used the term earlier, and I think it's probably worth just quickly before we move on to my next like general topic that you explain that a little more to the audience. So you used the term grassroots democracy. And I think, you know, me knowing you and having talked to you multiple times, I think I have a fairly good grasp of it. But I think it's important for people who really are tired of the rotation of Democratic leadership, right? And who understand that their material conditions are not changing despite this ongoing rotation of Democratic leadership, and Democratic by the Democrats, I mean. Capital D Democrats. And, so could you talk a little bit about what that term grassroots democracy means and what it would mean for Marylanders, right? Like, what does it mean in Maryland specifically?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when we think about inequality, we need to think about it in terms of resources, but we also need to think about it in terms of power. And so in a democracy like we have at the state government level in Maryland here, our legislators are very seldom accountable to people because they very seldom face significant primary or general election challenges. They have a short legislative session. And state legislators, just in general, are less accountable to people than any other level of government. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But for the most part, state level politics is the level of politics that people know the least about and is the least contested. What that sets up is a situation in which the people who are in charge of the politicians are the party bosses, the donors, and the corporations. And so what grassroots democracy says is that the power should be in the hands of the people. It should not be necessarily mediated by a set of organizations like advocacy organizations that decide who gets to pass what bill and things like that or have access to it. But the power should be in the hands of the people, and power should be vested in communities. And so what does that mean? That means that we try to push power out to communities via things like the Baltimore City Reparations Commission, which is there to hand out money that has come through the cannabis process. The people are appointed out of the community and they respond directly to the community. And I think like we have to look at these institutions of governance that take the power that the state government has and the resources that the state government has and put them in the hands of people, put them in the hands of people and communities, not in the hands of philanthropy organizations, not in the hands of state government, but as close to the ground as possible, where people have the most ability to influence the outcomes. If I want to change the vision of the governor, I got to run for governor. If I want to get my city council person to do something different, at least I can get 100 of my friends together and show up and make some noise, you know? And so to me, the grassroots democracy looks like putting power in the hands of people, putting resources into communities and allowing those to be the ones who determine how things get implemented, how things look, how funds get spent. Does that answer your question?
Definitely. And I'm going to throw you for a little bit of a loop. I think we've got like 5 minutes before we have to take our break, right? It's not a real loop. But I'm going to skip because I feel like because of your last answer, instead of going to my next question, which was really going to be about climate change and environment, and we'll get to that after we take our little break. But before instead, I'd like to go to your decision and real focus on prioritizing the people. And 71 Pan, I do see your hand up. Give me a minute. We're gonna go to a quick break. If you could put your question in the chat, and then we'll circle back to it after we take our little mini break where Andy's gonna talk about some asks that he has for the campaign. Um, but prioritizing the people is like it's a major factor in what you'd like to do, not just as part of your campaign, but if you were to win and be governor, like your intention is to really try and elevate the needs of the people and to have them participate. Can you talk about your plan for how that would work? Like, what does it look like to not just in your campaign, but also for your policy strategy, for your data collection, like for you, if you win the seat being the governor, what does it look like to allow people to have some power and to really prioritize the needs of the people based on what they want?
Yeah, sure. So let me start with the part that happens in the campaign. So the first thing is we're going to go to every part of the state and we're going to talk to everyone. Last weekend we were in Allegheny County and we were having maybe 2 weeks ago we were in Allegheny County and we were having a community meeting there where we were learning about the issues and priorities of people who are out there, Greens who are out there, and people who might be interested there. March 29th, we're taking one of those to Prince George's County, and we'll be at the South Bowie Library, and we plan on doing those across the state. Those are small table meetings where people can come, they can learn about the campaign, they can share their issues, they can talk about what's important to them, and we can help them connect to ways to get involved. Beyond that, I'm going to keep doing series like this where we have regular opportunities to have conversations and questions and answers and things like that. And do it about different topics with different people who have different ideas. Further, anybody can at any point send an idea to us at ideas@gogreen2026.com, and I'll give you a call and we'll talk about it. Now, let's talk about it more about what it looks like when we win or if we win, what that setting looks like. The first thing we need to do is to figure out real and effective means to get people participating in the discussions around governance. So we've all seen these town halls that politicians put on where they have pre-scripted questions and they have pre-selected people who are there giving the answer to asking the question that perfectly aligns with what the politician wants to talk about. That is fake inclusive democracy. That is fake grassroots democracy. It is promotional material. It is marketing material. And it's fine as promotional and marketing material, but it is not a way to get general people's feedback. So there's a really good set of studies about ways to actually do this in the right way. And the ways to actually do this in the right way are to randomly select people that are representative of the voter base and invite them to the town hall instead of inviting the user or the supporters of the politician to the town hall. So this is the thing that I really want to see us explore and would like us to see us do on a regular and weekly, maybe monthly basis in Maryland, is have regular people's town halls where folks get to come and comment on issues. They get to move around and avoid the advocacy groups that channel how everything works right now, and they get to talk directly to policymakers who have to listen. The second thing is making sure that we are putting resources and power into the hands of the organizations and the people who are doing the work on the ground right now. I don't mean the big philanthropy organizations. I don't mean the universities. I mean the grassroots community networks that exist in a lot of communities that are doing the work in order to fight for their community, and they know the solutions to the problems they face, but they don't have the resources or the capacity in order to be able to effectively challenge them. So they end up going begging to the state, they end up going begging to the philanthropy, or they hope that some university hooks them up. We believe that we can put those resources directly in their hands and put the power directly in their hands. Third thing I would say about this is we want to figure out as many ways as possible to have groups of people making decisions at the local level that are responsible to the public. Does this mean like electing commissioners? Does it mean, figuring out different ways to have directly elected people who are controlling funds? It probably means all of those things. But we need to figure out a way to stop consolidating power in Annapolis and instead allow democratic power to be exerted in communities where people actually live. So those are some of it, but I mean, I think this is a discussion that has to not just change the way that we think about, like not just change the mechanisms, but change the way that we think about how politics works. We have to go to every part of the state. We have to listen to each person in the state, and we have to not just focus on the places that are the traditional places where politicians focus, but then we just have to have a different conception of power as well. We have to think about power as something that is important for people to have, not for politicians to hoard.
It just made sense to go to that question next. It's just logical to take that one next. Um, so I think we're gonna go to your campaign ask, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
So I will let you take over for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll go
Okay.
to the questions.
Okay, great. So we are doing a whole lot of really good work on we're doing a whole lot of really good work to get this campaign up and running, and we've got a lot of folks that are volunteering, and we've got a lot of greens to reach out to. And so one of the things that I'm not very good at is doing the part where we ask people for money. But there are a whole bunch of people on this call who I would like to be able to put to work doing projects or helping out things that they're already doing. There's a whole bunch of voters that I need to reach out and contact to in order to hear their ideas, but also to be able to understand, like, what we need to do in order to help make their lives better, because that's ultimately what the goal is here. So this month we are trying to raise $2,500 in order to by the end of the March, so that we can hit our fundraising goal for this month. We'll use that money to pay some volunteers to do projects here and there. We'll use that money to do mailings to Greens. We'll use that money to host these different types of events that we're doing around the state right now. And we'll use that money to start making the investment and the kind of organizing that we need to do in order to really be able to run this campaign at scale. Because at the end of the day, we're not just here to talk about ideas. We're here to change outcomes. Special interests, as David says, have a very strong grip on the state at this point. And if we want to get different outcomes for different people, we're going to have the power to be able to fight those folks and to build something truly new and truly better that responds to them. So I think the link is probably in the chat. Georgia just dropped it in there right now. And if you can, anything you can do helps us get to that $2,500, helps us get to that $2,500 goal for the month. And it is not my favorite part, as I said before, but it is a part we have to do. We have to do this fundraising because of the way that elections currently run. Last thing I want to say about this is that we are intending to use Maryland's public financing for gubernatorial campaigns. And that is a really good program. We should always be supporting public financing whenever we can, because it is a way to level the playing field. So if you are a Maryland resident and would rather hold your contribution off until the public financing starts, please drop us a note or something like that, and we'll figure out how to handle that. However, for the people who are not in Maryland, now is a great time to go ahead and make your contribution. Help us get to that $2,500, get that match from Georgia, and help us really take the power of these ideas, put them to work, and make sure that they are, able to be implemented, and we're able to tell as many people as possible. Okay, that's my little fundraising pitch.
Awesome.
Do we have some questions?
We do. We have a couple of questions, and I just want to quickly point out before we go to the questions that Georgia has offered to do a match. And so she's asking if anyone wants to match her $100 donation to help you get to your goals. So I just wanted to make sure that folks saw that. And that would be great. Georgia says 10 people can do $10 and she'll match that $100. So I appreciate
Excellent.
that.
Thank you, Georgia.
So we have 71 Pan who has a question. They did write it in the chat. I'm gonna go ahead and ask Brian to allow 71 Pan to unmute so that they can ask their question.
Hi, Andy Ellis. Thank you so much.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Good.
Good. I remember last time we talked about cash payment reparations, right? That you do support them for black American freedmen who are the descendants of chattel slavery. I noticed on your website you told you made changes to the website Repair Pay, right? I'm gonna say this. Uh, in the comments I said, let's see, let me bring it up. When you say pay reparations and invest in community-led repair and reinvestment, this statement, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not going to sell very well to the Black American freemen voters. I mean, Black American voters in Maryland because it's too vague. It's not very lineage space specific. Because when you say communities, it could mean like different groups, Hispanics, Asians, Jewish. Doesn't necessarily include Black American voters. So there needs to be a separate category in your platform to say cash payment reparations for Black American freedmen of chattel slavery, because other groups have their own designation and limits. Like Japanese Americans get reparations that's based on concentration camp, and they didn't include all Asians, because not all Asians you know, encountered atrocities. So I just want to know why the website hasn't been updated to include to say or include Black American freedom of chattel slavery in Maryland, because they want cash payment reparations. And also, when I look at the report you mentioned to me about tax credits as reparations, they're not really reparations at all, because tax credits to Black American Marylanders means they have to wait until the next year to get a tax returns. And when they get tax returns, it's not that much money, unlike cash payment reparations. So I think like you could do both cash payment reparations and tax credit. And also, the cash payment reparations have to be tax exempt, because what we saw in Tulsa, what happened to the Black Wall Streets all over the United States, was never protected. So I was wondering if you have a policy once Black Marylanders receive cash payment reparations, would they be tax exempt because of debt that is owed to them, and as well as making sure they have their own designation, because Black Marylanders cannot afford the excessive inequality that's been baked in this country.
Yep. So, Michael, thank you. So yeah, I did make changes to the website. I hear what you're saying about being more specific about it. So I will definitely take a look at some of the stuff that you sent me and try to make it more specific in that regard. So let me talk about a couple of things as it relates to reparations in Maryland right now, and how I think that the campaign relates to it. So first of all, there is and we'll talk about some things that are kind of called reparations that I think are a little bit gray area at the moment, but are part of Maryland policy right now. So 25% of of recreational cannabis funds go into a community repair and reinvestment fund in Maryland at this point, and that fund allocates money based on the number of people who were incarcerated, allocates funds to counties based on the number of people who were incarcerated in that county during the war on drugs. So that is their current mechanism that they're using in order to identify what are the places where Black folks are primarily living and were primarily hurt as the means of using that tool. I don't really think that it is necessarily reparations in the sense that giving money to counties is more community repair and reinvestment than I think it is reparations. But it was passed under a reparations lens and framework, and so it often gets talked about in that way. In Baltimore City, the implementation of that is a reparation fund that is set up as a commission of people appointed by each city council person to allocate those funds in a way that is aligned with grassroots community capacity building and things like that. That's one piece of it. The second piece of it is that there is a bill in front of the General Assembly right now, sponsored by the Black Caucus, so we'll see what happens with it, to create a commission to study to study cash payment reparations, to study tax credits, to study property credits, to study a bunch of different things. It is also looking at it would look at how to clearly define the group that is, it would look at how to clearly define Black people who were recipients, potential recipients of those reparations. It is also looking at ways to hold institutions that are not governmental accountable for direct payments that would not be needed to be made. This bill is okay. It's a study bill, and study bills oftentimes mean inaction, but it is a study bill that I think studies the right things. It's going to be interesting to see first how the Democrats respond to this bill and whether they actually allow it to pass or not, or whether it dies sort of a very slow death on the vine. Either way, we don't have a say in that right now. That's up to the Democrats to decide.
Right.
If that bill does pass, and I'm the governor, when those recommendations come to my desk in 2027, I'm going to make sure that I'm talking to you and I'm talking to other people who understand very clearly how this needs to happen to make sure that we are implementing those recommendations in the right way. My guess is right now, if those recommendations were to come to a Democrat or a Republican governor, that would be where it ended. Those recommendations would just sort of die on the vine, and we would never hear any implementation of them possible. So I think that it is going to. So if that bill doesn't pass, and the commission isn't able to get their work done, then and no further, and nothing further happens on it than just a study bill between now and 2026. When we become governor, if I become governor, we will make the General Assembly take up the practice of creating a solution, figure out how to do direct cash payments, figure out how to do property tax credits, figure out how to figure out how to avoid taxing. All those policy things that you're bringing up, I think, are important things to figure out uh, for the state of Maryland, and I think it needs to look at other states for doing that. So let's see what happens with this bill that they have right now. It's not, study bills. You and I have discussed that study bills are oftentimes used as a means of inaction. And I would not be surprised if this one is that. But I think the question will be if the Democrats will even allow the study bill to pass this year that is sponsored by our Legislative Black Caucus, which is the largest legislative Black caucus in the country. If they do allow it to pass, well, then the question will be, what are the conclusions of it and how do we force them to do it? If they don't allow it to pass, then it will be very clear that this is something that the party has no interest in doing and that it needs to get pressure from the outside. So look, I think that the topic of reparations is an important one. I think it is the thing that we need to work on in Maryland. And as I said to you the other day, I'll follow up with you soon and we can have another conversation and we can talk about more specific wording for the website in order to get to the point that addresses the concerns you're raising here.
Right, because it can't be a study. There's so many studies done on reparations already, and most of the Black American freedmen grassroots are past the studies.
Yeah.
Reparations studies already done. Because when you said about the bill introducing the Maryland State Assembly registered study bill, I can guarantee it's not gonna go anywhere at all because there's no numbers for how much the cash payments should be issued to the Black American freedmen of chattel slave in Maryland. So it needs to go. The cost payment reparations in Maryland, if you do get elected, need to be put on the floor vote. It can't put on the study because when you give it to the Black Caucus, like CBC, for example, Congressional Black Caucus, they didn't
Well,
move.
let's not talk about the CBC. Let's talk about the Legislative Black Caucus here in
Yeah,
Maryland.
so that's what I mean. Not all, yeah, I want to say clearly that not all members of the Maryland Black Caucus are the Black American freedmen of chattel slavery. So it's
Sure.
just letting you know that when they write the reparations, they don't mean they don't mean to include Black American freedmen of chattel slaves. So it has to be lineage based. It can't be race
It
based.
is limits based. I mean, the legislation has a part of it that focuses on making sure that it is like determining those limits properly. Like, I think, look, I agree with you that study bills are not great. This is the bill that the General Assembly has right now, and we're not in a position of power at this point in order to be able to implement it. So, like, I think our effort is push the General Assembly to pass this bill this year and hold them accountable if they won't even study it. And then if we get elected, yeah, it's going to be a different situation. And it will depend on whether this commission comes back. If they do found this commission and it comes back, its recommendations will come in January 1 of 2027, which will be right when we're about to take office. And it will be the job of the next governor to determine if that study comes back. It'll be the job of the next governor to determine how those things are implemented. So I do think that the question of reparations is an important question in the governor's race because one way or another, it's going to take action by the next governor in order to do anything beyond studying it. And I think there's a lot of folks that will push Wes Moore if this bill passes to sign it and to aggressively work on it. And I think there's a lot of other folks in the Democratic Party who will push Wes Moore and the Democrats to stay as far away from it as possible. So I think it will be interesting to see what happens in the next 30 days with this bill. And I also know that it's not the solution to it. And we can let's you and I follow up more on this. I'll get in touch with you and we can have more conversation about the nuances of what it needs to be. And I appreciate you bringing up the question
Sure,
here.
because in California it failed. When the California legislature, the CLBC, the California Black Caucus,
Yeah,
introduced reparations, one of the members refused to put the reparations bills up for vote by design on purpose. And a lot of Black American Californians were upset because they're
yeah,
like, look, if you got two bills for reparations, put up for a floor vote. Because although the bill's not perfect, it included like reparations fund, education, but at least add money. They want to see a vote. They don't want to see commission. Commissions have been done in California already. So I just
yeah.
want to make sure if you're a governor, Like, please make sure that make sure there's not gonna be no commission, because why do we need a commission for when there's already
Well,
studies done by Dr. William Darity, Dr. Claude Anderson, and several black economists? They could tell you how slavery started, how slavery ended, and they could tell you a monetary value. It's definitely should be cash payment, because when you have recommendations in the state of, conducted by the commission, they're not going to really draft policies or offer substance for cash payment
right.
reparations. It will just be education, healthcare, and to black
That's, I mean,
men
no,
and
I mean,
women.
look, the bill is about cash payments. The bill is about using the
Suppose
commission.
right, it needs to, but the only problem is because they're going to debate it, whether slavery happened or not. No, we need to go beyond that, because that was a mistake that John Conyers did in 1989, HR 40. I'm sure everybody can Google up HR 40. It didn't gain any traction. It didn't move at all for so many years until reparations became an issue in 2016 or 29. They don't want to, and you understand the young black Marylanders don't want to see studies. They're tired of studies. We have the data. The numbers say, well, what they want to see is a vote. Are they going to vote for cash payment reparations? Put it for floor vote. I mean,
Yeah. I
regardless of
mean,
the outcome, if two state assembly members agree or disagree, but they want to see votes, because that's what democracy supposed to be about, because a mistake happened in California should not be repeated. And
yeah.
and
And I mean, we don't have the ability, like right now, the piece of legislation that is on the floor in the General Assembly is a study bill. I agree that a study bill is not the ideal position, but we don't have enough Greens or enough folks in office to put a bill in right now that would make anything but a study what they're debating. So, like, let's see what happens with the study bill. And if the study bill does pass, the next governor will be responsible for handling and dealing with and implementing the recommendations. If the study bill doesn't pass, then we need to propose something entirely different and go in a different route in future General Assembly sessions. So I mean, it's like I think there's a lot of good discussion about the strategy of this and about the legislative approach to it, and ultimately. I'm committed to cash payment reparations. I'm committed to community repair and reinvestment funds, and I'm committed to making sure that we do all of those things. The question right now is one for how the Democrats are going to resolve those issues, because ball's in their court and they're the ones with the power at the moment.
yeah, but I can tell you the Democrats are
I'm
against
sorry,
reparations.
we have to move on to the next. Thank you very much for your question. But I want to make sure we don't run we don't run out of time. Um, so there's David has a statement in the chat. I don't think it's quite a question, but it is something that maybe you can address. David says we need to address the problem of the special interests who wrap themselves in the progressive small p. For instance, the budget crisis in state government is in large part due to the Democratic majority in the legislature passing the Kirwan Commission recommendations. It was passed with a $30 billion cost over 10 years and no funding mechanism. The result is a budget crisis. So they crush all opposition or questioning. It's literally, are you against funding educational progress for minority children, for example?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think this is an interesting question because I believe, I believe in funding public education to the fullest extent possible and making sure that we're investing in that in any way possible. When the Democrats proposed the blueprint in 2019 and 2020, the state budget office told them that they were going to need to raise income taxes, property taxes, and sales taxes in order to pay the $30 billion price. But they refused to do so for years and years and years. And they refused to do so um, because it was politically untenable for them to raise to embrace progressive taxation. So as early as 2019 and early as 2020, there were groups that were saying that we needed to change Maryland's progressive tax system, that we needed to do it right now, and that if we weren't going to end up in a budget crisis as a result of the commitment we had made to public education, it had to happen a long time ago. So Wes Moore waited till this year to make some of those proposals, and he did a watered down version of those proposals that are too late, too little and too late to really be able to address the problem. So like my position on this is if you're going to propose legislation that costs $30 billion and your budget and taxation people tell you you're going to have to raise taxes, then you should not try to raise the funds by nibbling around the edges on fees on people and on hidden taxes and pretending that you're not raising taxes when you are. It costs more money to spend $30 billion on education. And if we're going to spend $30 billion on education, we should tell people the tax price up front. And so I think that's a little bit of a different question. It's a slightly different part of an answer to the question that David is asking, but whether or not we have a $30 billion education program, I think is a good question that is up for debate. Whether we pay for a $30 billion education program is not a question that we can debate. If we pass if the Democrats use their supermajority to pass something that costs $30 billion, then we got to pay for it. We got to be able to be transparent with people and tell them what the cost is going to be of these big spending programs. And if people want it, again, at the time that the blueprint passed, people were willing to pay higher taxes in order to have an investment in public education. For 5 years, the Democrats told people that they weren't going to raise the taxes on it, and now that they're saying that they have to in order to pay for it, people are less willing to pay for it. So, we got to pay for the stuff that we pass. The second thing is about the special interests. So part of the reason that the special interests are so powerful in Annapolis is because the legislature is isolated from the people. We have a relatively short legislative term. Most of our elections are not contested. And in order to get anything done in Annapolis, there has to be an advocacy organization that is working with the legislatures on your behalf. That system puts all the power in the hands of the special interests and none of the power in the hands of the people. So we need to start breaking down all of those things. We need to ask, can Maryland really do all of its business with a 90-day legislative session? We need to make sure that there are more competitive elections up and down the ballot so that legislators are actually accountable to the people and not the special interests. And we need to make sure that there's accesses to power and to doing things in Annapolis that don't have to go through one of these nonprofit advocacy groups that is part of one of the two political parties. So I think that taking on special interests has to be building political movements that have power outside of those special interests, and can go around the rules that they've defined for how we operate.
Awesome. Thank you. And then one last comment, and then we'll go back to me asking you questions. is and it is from Grant, and Grant says one thing that would win over younger voters immediately would be nationalized public municipal broadband internet. A goal to eliminate internet bills is something neither party would do, and I think that's actually a really good idea. I have no idea what it would take for something like that to happen,
Yeah.
to be honest. But
And let me tell you a little bit of a story about this. So let me tell you a little bit of a story about this internet question. So in 2020, Franca Mueller-Paz was running as a Green, and she was a teacher. So during the COVID shutdowns, she was really talking about, like, she was really seeing that many of her students didn't have the internet that they needed to do the work in the remote school. So she was advocating for city-provided Wi-Fi, city-provided broadband, et cetera, et cetera. And she was doing pretty good at advocating for that because she was speaking to an issue that really affected people and that really affected their children's ability to learn. So Brandon Scott, the Democratic mayor of Baltimore City, heard this, and he decided that his solution to this was to be basically to get the city to negotiate a deal with Comcast and Xfinity so that Baltimore City school students would have a coupon, which was basically cheaper internet, but still paying Comcast for it. And I think what's interesting here is a Green and a Democrat looked at the same problem, which was students not having access to internet, even though it was a necessity at that time. And the Green said, use city resources and state resources to pay for it for the students. And the Democrat said, here's a coupon from Comcast that we negotiated with them, right? And I think we need folks willing to say, use city and state resources to break the power of the corporations and bring services directly to the people, not here's a coupon for you in order to pay the corporation a little bit less money.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. All right. So back to my list. Um, so the Green Party, one of the big things for the Green Party that I hear a lot is that the only thing we care about is the environment. That's why we're the Green Party, Green New Deal, that association is often made. And although I recognize in being a part of the party and and doing some reading and focus, it's not the only focus, but it is a major pillar. Um, so can you talk about beyond, and please include the environment, of course, but also in general, how are the party policies, the national party policies, the national pillars, the big tenets, like how are these things applicable to Maryland specifically? And with regard to the climate emergency that's happening in Maryland, how do you envision like involving communities in those policy practices that you discussed earlier?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So let me start by saying we say in our campaign that we are going to declare an environmental and climate emergency, and we are not using that as a metaphor. One of the things that we learned during COVID is that the emergency powers of the governor are pretty significant in the state of Maryland. You can get clinics up and running right away. You can get money allocated. You can get resources allocated, et cetera. So one of the things that we're going to do as soon as we take office is declare climate emergencies and environmental emergencies in specific communities across the state that are dealing with the cumulative impacts of pollution, that are dealing with environmental racism, and that are dealing with polluters who not only refuse to pay for the pollution that they're doing, but have deals with politicians that allow them to keep doing it. So we would, I think, declare a climate emergency pretty quickly so that we can get resources into the hands of the communities in order to build their own resilience. In most of these communities, there is a movement of people that is democratically aligned, that is working against the polluter already, and they simply need the resources to scale up the kind of work that they're doing, and they need the power in order to hold that polluter accountable. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to stop constructing new fossil fuel infrastructure, especially the fossil fuel infrastructure that is used to export things out of Maryland. So CSX has a large coal terminal in Curtis Bay, open air coal terminal sitting in the middle of a working class community that they're not even using to provide energy to Marylander. They're using in order to export to other countries so that they can burn coal. So the community has demanded there be really strict licensing on that type of thing. The community has demanded that the corporation, that the CSX pay for it. And CSX has not been willing to pay for it, and the state has not really been willing to force them to do so. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that that's regulated in a way that immediately takes care of the safety of the people in that community. And then we're going to figure out how to close down the coal export plant and figure out how to replace the 50 or 60 jobs that are related with that in that community and figure out how to make sure that there's a just transition for those folks. The second one is while we don't have any fracking in Maryland, we have a natural liquefied gas export plant in Cove Point. And we got to figure out, so yes, Maryland has a ban on fracking, but we're using trains to take stuff across the state to a natural gas export point, trains and pipelines to take stuff to a natural gas export port. And we got to look at transitioning away from that as well. So those are two of the policies, I think, climate emergency and an end to new fossil fuel infrastructure that apply at the national level with the Green Party as it relates to the environment. The other thing that we need to start doing is starting to make sure that the polluters are paying. There's a bill to allow fracking, as David says, that would allow it to come back. So we need to make sure that ban stays in place, and then we need to make sure that there is a system set up to require polluters who knowingly contributed to the decimation of communities, put unhealthy things in the water and in the air and in the ground, that they are responsible for paying in order to repair those damages that have been done. And then I think we also need to look at the way that we are subsidizing big commercial agriculture. We're subsidizing big commercial agriculture on the Eastern Shore and other places. We need to figure out how to make sure that we are willing to stand up to those big companies that are, pumping chicken waste into the water system over and over again, and force them to first pay for the pollution and then stop it. So those are some of the things. I also think that our focus on a solidarity economy, which is an economy that is localized, that is not subsidizing big multinational corporations, and that is focused on, unique development within Maryland communities, is also another big part of that. And so I also think the last thing I'll say here is we have to have a just transition. We cannot simply take away the industries that have been benefiting off of, the polluting industries, and not find jobs and not find ways to plug the people in who are getting thrown out of those jobs. So like there has to be a program probably involving our community colleges, probably involving our state universities, and probably involving a lot of other things to shift those people into jobs that can help us make the transition we need to make. Look, Maryland is one of 50 states, and the United States is one country. We cannot solve the climate problem with Maryland policy, even if we had the most aggressive policies in the world. But what we can do is we can help communities have the resources to mitigate and fight back against the crisis. We can help to repair the damage that polluters have done, and make them pay for it. And we can begin to engage in and we can also begin to engage in a transition that sees a different kind of economy, sees different kind of jobs, and sees different kind of work. And like we have to do these things. The crisis is coming, and if we do nothing about it, sooner or later we'll see our insurance market wiped out, like Florida's and California's are. And we will have to figure out how it is that we can address these crises. They're not going anywhere. We can't avoid them. And we need to make sure that communities have the resources to be resilient, and that we repair the damage that has been done before. And then we empower the people who have been doing the good work to be able to be the ones who lead the solutions going forward.
Well, you somehow managed to answer like all three of my last questions. One. I don't think it was intentional, but this is what happens because it's all kind of, it all works together, right? Like it's hard to talk about the environmental issues and how you plan on working through those policy changes and how, how you address these things without acknowledging what's happening in Curtis Bay, right?
Right.
It's almost impossible to not have that conversation. Um, but I think specifically because that environmental injustice that happens in Maryland specifically between what's happening with the lead paint in Baltimore, with the water, with CSX, with the road to nowhere. Is there anything you want to add specifically about how that specific racial injustice where it comes to the environmental issues, how that would play a role within your campaign and as part of your strategy?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think racial justice is at the center of racial justice is at the center of the work that we're trying to do here. And so, whether that is in Bethesda, where the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition is fighting against a Democratic county government that is trying to take away, that is trying to build development on top of what was a Black community's burial ground, and have had to fight over and over again and won at the Supreme Court level in order to simply stop the parking lot that is built on top of their burial ground from taking precedence over the lives of the descendants who want that. So we have to figure out whether it's there or whether it's in Curtis Bay, where CSX has, like I said, a coal export terminal sitting in the middle of a community, or whether it is in other parts of the state, where in Prince George's County, where I think that data centers are increasingly becoming the way to create jobs and economy, but by taking land that is owned by Black folks. We have to have an understanding that we're going to recognize the problems that have happened in the past. We're going to stop them. And then we're going to figure out how to get resources to those communities and the people who are aggrieved in those communities in order to begin to repair that type of thing. And this has to be the focus. And I think we can find examples, um, we can find examples across the board of where this is happening. And the cemetery question is one really unique area of it. The environmental injustice that is happening in Curtis Bay and in Baltimore City is another one. And I think that there are a series of these things that have happened in Maryland. Maryland is a state that was just barely not in the Confederacy. And there has been a lot of Black communities that have been destroyed in Maryland. There's been a lot of land that has been seized, and there's been a lot of polluters that have had free reign to, pile up the cumulative impacts of pollution on Black communities. So we gotta recognize that stuff. We gotta put policies in place to stop it, and we gotta give communities the power and resources to be able to fight back.
Thank you. And then very quickly, because there are a couple of more questions in the chat that I want to make sure we get to before we have to close out. But you mentioned a solidarity economy, and similar to grassroots democracy, I think, it's something that people, some people are familiar with. I know I'm somewhat familiar with it, but I would like, if you could explain it a little more. I think it's really important for people to understand that for you and your campaign, you acknowledge and recognize that housing, healthcare, and education are basic human rights, that everyone should have access to them, that it should not be a thing that's predetermined by how much money you have or how much access you have to resources, that it should be something that's automatic based on the fact that you are a human living in this place. But can you explain kind of what you mean by solidarity economy, and then how those basic human rights that are part of your campaign and your beliefs, how that fits within that term?
Sure. So when we talk about a solidarity economy, we mean one that is focused on local economies instead of corporations. We mean one that is focused on giving people power, economic power as necessary in order to democratize the workplace, to democratize their community. We mean an economy that is based in human rights, not in exploitation. And we mean an economy that is not geared toward extraction, but one that is geared toward building up the resources that the community has and that each person has. So some things that this includes for us beyond the abstract idea of it is it includes a progressive, clear, and transparent taxation system that is not hitting working people at every possible angle, and that is putting the majority of the benefit on the people and corporations who are making the most money. We also mean that we're going to put money back in the hands of working people and working families, and that we're going to decrease the tax and fee burden on folks that are just trying to get by, while people who make $400,000 a year are treated the same as people who make $40,000 a year. It means that we're going to have public banks that make capital available to people who have been traditionally denied capital by corporate banks. And it means that we're going to have public banks that handle our transaction fees for all the money that Maryland has invested in different, bond funds and things like that. It means that we're not going to give giveaways to major corporations, begging them to stay here. Instead, we're going to invest in local businesses, and we're going to invest in local economies using the built infrastructure that Maryland has in the cities and in places like that. It means that we're going to support the development of more cooperative economic structures. We're going to remove the barrier for businesses that want to go from a privately owned business into a worker-owned business. We're going to provide incentives for those businesses, and we're going to figure out how those businesses can be a key part of revitalizing places all across Maryland that have dealt with years of corporate disinvestment and governments that have played along with that. So whether we're talking about Cumberland, or whether we're talking about Havre de Grace, or whether we're talking about Hagerstown, or whether we're talking about Salisbury, these towns have dealt with the corporations pulling up and running away and taking things out of those towns, extracting resources. And we're going to help to figure out how to rebuild those urban centers so that people can thrive in those places. We're also going to talk about making sure that the Public Services Commission that right now allows corporations to run utility programs that sock ratepayers on coming and going and raise rates without any clear democratic accountability, we're going to talk about municipal utilities, and we're going to talk about democratically controlled utilities. So those are a lot of the things that are part of it. I think it is a vision for a different kind of economy that works differently. And I think it's really important right now because Maryland has thrived for years based on its dependence on the federal government. And the federal government makes up about, I think, 10% of Maryland taxpayers, and way more than that in the amount of the tax base. And so we need to figure out is about how we move past a state that is entirely dependent on that federal government and start building one that is dependent on Maryland's people who are here right now, who are trying to build businesses and are trying to work here, because at the end of the day, no matter how many cuts Trump makes to the federal government, Democrats are starting to agree that the government is too big and too bloated and there's waste, fraud, and abuse, and they just think that it is that they just would cut different things. But Maryland can't continue operating on the kind of economy that we've operated on for this long time. So over the next decade, we need to look at how we transform the economy so that it works for everyone. Right now, Maryland has the highest eviction rates in the country. We evict more people than anybody else. Our housing prices are drastically skyrocketing at this point. And people who do get evicted in these houses, or people who get evicted, have nowhere to go because the market of rent is increasing so fast. There's a bill in front of the General Assembly that would offer the most bare level of protections to renters facing evictions, good cause evictions, not that significant of a burden on landlords and rental companies, but it's probably not going to pass because the General Assembly doesn't want to, limit the developers and limit the landlords. So we need to be able to do things that recognize that everybody should have a home and center that as part of the policy. What the solution looks like for that, something we got to work out. But the value is nobody should be homeless. Nobody should be without a home. Same thing with healthcare. I saw a survey the other day that said something like 35% of Marylanders have recently foregone necessary healthcare because the costs were too high. And that's only going to get worse with the Medicaid cuts that are coming. And it's only going to get worse as the insurance companies keep getting to run roughshod over everything else. So we're going to need to be able to find a way to move toward a state-based single-payer system. I don't love it. I would much rather Congress move on this and we get to a place where Congress is the one that is implementing national single-payer. But I think that both parties have abandoned that concept at the national level because it's not working for them. And so we've got to start thinking in Maryland, what do we do to ensure that no Marylander is not without health care and that no Marylander is is having to forego necessary medical care because they can't afford it, right? That is just something we should not tolerate in one of the richest states in the country. And we've got to figure out a way to make sure that that's not happening anymore.
Thank you. So those were all my questions, but we do have a few in the chat. We've got maybe about 15 so minutes left. So let's just jump right in if you don't mind. So Grant is asking, as a resident of Hartford County, what will you do for the primarily Republican Eastern Shore? And he wants to be sure that he includes Hartford in that consideration when you answer.
Yeah. So, I think this is an important question. I think we have to be able to understand that Maryland is not just Baltimore, Prince George's, Montgomery, and Frederick County. So, first of all, we're gonna go to all of these parts of the state. We're gonna go to Hartford County. We're gonna go to the Eastern Shore, and we're gonna talk to folks about what they need and what the situation is there and why a Green Party could help them. So last week or 2 weeks ago, we were in Allegheny County, which is in Western Maryland, and we had a really good conversation there. Grant let me know, and we'll get one going up in Bel Air or in Hartford County sometime soon, and we'll also be in the Upper and the Lower Shore. The second thing is, I think that at the end of the day, the Republican Party right now is garnering voters who are dissatisfied with the status quo and who don't feel like they're benefiting from the economic opportunity that the rest of Maryland, or that the suburban and urban parts of Maryland are benefiting from. And so I think that there's a lot of reasons that people turn to the Republican Party are because the Democratic Party is not listening to their concerns or meeting their needs. But I also think the Republican Party thinks that is a license for cruelty, austerity, and sort of cheering on the worst policies of the DC Republicans. And I don't think that that actually sells very well in Maryland. So I think, I think figuring out ways to address the economic anxiety that folks have, and the feeling that their county is being left out of the Democrats' plan for the state, unless it is to get Democrats elected in that state, um, is something that we have to do. I think the other thing we're going to do is there are all sorts of places in the Eastern Shore of Southern Maryland and Northern Maryland where Republicans are uncontested in the House and Senate delegate races that they have. And we're going to look for folks to run against them with real working class values and real working class solutions, and not leave it up to the Democrats to be the ones to challenge them in those places. So Grant, I'd love to talk to you more about this. I'd love to come up and do a community meeting in Harford County, and then figure out how we can get more engaged and figure out what the issues that you're seeing there are, so that we can figure out how our values and solutions can help people understand that they have a choice that is not Democrat or Republican.
Thank you. We also have a question on local solidarity, and if you have an approach you want to discuss regarding the issue of land back.
Yeah, so I think the land, I think as far as land back goes in the state of Maryland, it is interesting because there are a couple of tribes in the state of Maryland that are unrecognized by the federal government. And so they're in a weird negotiating position when it comes to land claims and things like that, because much of that stuff gets adjudicated at the federal level. So to the degree that they are interested in getting federal recognition, and the state has a part to play in that, I think that is a policy commitment that we have to make. Beyond that, I think we have to understand that we have to work with Indigenous people here in Maryland to understand exactly like what the specific claims about land are and how we can get engaged with them, firmly committed to making sure that that land is returned and that land is available to folks. But we got to work with them to figure out the specific concerns in that. And the third thing I would say here is there is also a lot of black land theft in the state of Maryland that we can't ignore in the process of trying to look at giving land back to Indigenous folks. So and Montgomery County, the River Road community who used the Moses Macedonia Cemetery that I mentioned earlier, had a thriving community right there on River Road that was chased out by the Klan, chased out by local policy, and chased out by vigilantes of all sorts. And so we need to understand that that type of thing has happened here in Maryland too, and make sure that we are figuring out how to allow those folks to have repair and reinvestment in their communities and reparation, specifically when the land has been taken, and we need to be able to address it. So I think that this is a broad question that we certainly agree that land justice is an important element of it. We've got to work with specific Indigenous groups to understand the specific things they need from the state government and from the movements in order to help move their claims forward. And we have to use the same land back philosophy to understand the way that Black communities have been decimated by county governments, by vigilantes, and by corporations.
All right, and then we have one more. Although Maryland has a balanced budget amendment, the Maryland State Assembly spends a lot of money on big corporations and the super wealthy who are not held accountable for the budget deficit. If elected to office, will you use the state executive power to eliminate the balanced budget amendment within the first 100 days?
The balance, I mean, the budget is required to be the budget is required to be balanced in the state constitution. And I'm not I don't actually think that that's a bad thing. But I do think it prevents a challenge for state policy making, because I think state policy making that doesn't have the ability, oftentimes at the national level, the Green Party will talk about funding their things by cutting the military budget or by modern monetary theory or things that really only work at the federal level. And I think that we have to begin to understand what politics look like in a world in which we have to balance budgets, in which revenue and expenditures have to match each other. So I don't think that I am for changing the Maryland Constitution to allow us to run a debt or a deficit. I don't ultimately think that it is helpful for the state to do that, especially when the state doesn't have the ability to make money. That being said, I do think we need to retune what a green vision of politics looks like at a state level where we have to balance budgets. And I think the point that I was making earlier about um, the necessity to be upfront and realistic about the tax bill that something has is going to be a huge and important part of how we get Maryland, how we transform Maryland into a state that is focused on solidarity, not one that is on extraction. I think that simplifying the way that we handle taxes, simplifying the way that we handle fees, so that basically there is a state income tax, a state sales tax, and a state property tax, is probably the way to go on this. Remove as many of the user fees use as many of the user fees as possible, remove as many of the kickers in the sales tax, and make most of it occur through capital gains, estate taxes, wealth taxes, income taxes, corporate taxes, and removing corporate tax loopholes and corporate giveaways, I think is probably the better way to go about it than getting into a world. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be a property tax for a little while, but yes, I think we should ultimately move to a place where income tax is handling the vast majority of it, and it is hyper progressive, and it is taxing the wealthiest folks at a level that is commensurate to the amount of services that wealthy people get in this state. There's a good podcast that Jose, who's on the call, and I did about the Maryland budget that I think we talk about some of this stuff in some depth in there. And so it's a topic that I'm interested in, and I don't know whose question it is, but I would love to follow up more with you about the conversation about budget, taxes, and how that relates to a solidarity economy after the event. So if whoever that is can just make sure that you put the email in the chat, and Brian, if you can grab that for me, I'll reach out to that person.
All right. Well, I think we are actually just about at time. And so we there's some great and hopefully, and I think it's all one same is the person you're addressing with this list of fantastic things, half of which I don't understand because the whole tax budget, yeah, that's not my wheelhouse. So, but I do hope that that person will be in touch. I also made the suggestion. I think probably having that direct conversation about reparations and dedicating a full town hall to it might be a good idea, so people can have, some real opportunity to talk to you like in depth about what that is, because I think it is definitely a conversation that's worth having kind of on its own. Um, but outside of that, I think we're ready to wrap. And I'm going to turn it over to you for the conclusion. I just want to thank you one more time for asking me to be involved. This was a really good conversation. Don't forget to tell people how they'll get access to the recording. And I really thank you for letting me take part in the conversation. This was great.
Excellent. Thank you, Renee, and thank you all for being involved. We will make sure we send out the recording to everybody who RSVP'd and everybody who is in the Zoom. We'll also post it on our YouTube page and on our other things. And so I definitely, the reason that I want to do these and that I want to do a series of them is because I think each one is going to indicate things that we should talk about more. So I think we should have another one of these that is all about reparations. We should have another one of these that is about progressive taxation. We can have another one about solidarity economy and grassroots democracy. My goal is to create these as spaces where we can have a good conversation, where we can understand new ideas, where we can make connections, and where we can build on it afterwards. So Grant, I know you're busy. I think we all are, and part of the reason that we're trying to collect resources for this campaign right now is to make sure that a few of us can be dedicated to it, so that we can come to Bel Air, and we can come to Hagerstown, and we can go to Prince George's County, and do different things in those places, and get people excited, get people engaged, and let folks know how they can share their ideas and plug in. So I want to give you an update. So far, we are at $28 in donations. And so if we can, I know Georgia has pledged that she will get, the Georgia has pledged that once it gets to 100, we will get 100 from her. So if you can, go ahead and throw in $3, $5, $20, $50 or whatever makes sense. And I will let Georgia know when we get there. And I just want to thank you all for coming out to this. This is the first one of these that we've done. And it is, I'm excited to see the conversations in the chat. I'm excited to see the interest that people have. And I'm excited to connect with each of you as we go forward in order to figure out how we make this campaign something that all of us can contribute to, so that we can build a Maryland where everyone can thrive and that works for everyone. And so thank you to all who have donated. Thank you who have come here tonight. Again, you can reach me directly at andy@gogreen2026.com. And I know there's good stuff in the chat. We'll make sure we save all of that. We'll make sure we save all of that. And I know there's a couple of you who I want to get in touch with soon about next steps and follow-up conversations. So thank you all for that. And I think that's it. I think we're good for tonight. Thank you so much to Renee for being the host for this. Thank you to Brian for teching. Thank you to Georgia for offering a generous match. And thank you to all who participated. And thank you to all who donated.